Hello and Happy New Year. I'm Cindy Z, and welcome to our first Leader PHABRIX live webinar of 2024. What a busy year for sport 2024 is going to be, with more and more productions deploying SMPTE ST2110 media over IP-based productions. How do you ensure your production doesn't score an own goal? Well, Steve and Kevin are pleased to welcome Kristof Veken of EVS to join them now in an open and honest discussion about some of the common pitfalls that productions make when deploying SMPTE ST2110 systems in a live production environment. So, irrespective of whether you're an IP veteran or if this is your first IP rodeo, what better way to ensure that you have all your bases covered than to join us for the next hour or so? We'll be taking questions, so use the chat if you have any questions, and we'll ensure that Kristof, Steve, and Kevin answer them during the seminar today. Otherwise, we'll circle back to you offline, but we'll get all your questions answered. Glad you're here. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Cindy, and Happy New Year to everybody out there, and Happy New Year to Steve and Kristof.
Happy New Year to you too, Kevin.
Brilliant. Kristof, thank you for joining us, and let's start at the beginning. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, and obviously EVS as well, for those that I can't believe anybody who doesn't know EVS, but please go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Well, I joined EVS 14 years ago, and before that I worked for a systems integrator, and even way before that I worked for a TV station. So I'm a broadcast engineer, but I moved into IP, and the last couple of years I've been dealing with live IP, with all the standards, with PTP and everything related to it. And here I am right now, being in a webinar together with Leader PHABRIX.
Excellent. And Steve, so how is life on the West Coast at the moment?
Actually, the life here on the West Coast is quite nice. Quite nice. It was a little chilly this morning. It was in the high 30s, but the sun's coming out. It's going to be a gorgeous day.
Excellent. Right then, so everybody, what we're going to do is we're going to cover three main areas that are key to understanding live IP production. Area one is the standards and specifications. Then we're going to look at the terminology, and then personal experiences. So as broadcasters, you may only transition once in your lifetime from SDI to IP, unless maybe you buy another company that's SDI and hasn't migrated to IP, and then you do it again. But between Leader, PHABRIX, and EVS, we are involved in multiple customer migration projects. Some are small, some are medium-sized projects, and some are at an enterprise level. And all these projects have one thing in common. They're all completely different and varying degrees of complexity that from years of operational production staff have had with SDI, we have to replicate in IP. So not only are we managing the technology infrastructure migration, we're also managing an operational change process. So let's take a start by having a quick look at some of the standards and specifications that accompany 2110. And so I'm just going to jump here and the slide. Kristof, I think maybe it's a good point just to remind everybody where we are with 2110, or the SMPTE standard that is basically driving all of this.
Well, things have evolved the last couple of years a lot. When I started with live IP, as we call it within EVS, we were dealing with 2022-6. Now, for those not familiar with the standards, very simple. It was just taking an SDI stream and putting IP around it. Nothing more, nothing less. So it's very simple, and it was easy to use. Configuration, well, there were issues, but it was still okay. But we soon found out that the audio guys didn't like it. The reason for it, well, there was difficult to send a full 2022-6 stream to an audio console in order to just have only the audio available. So then they came with the next step, and that was 2110. And 2110, what we see today, is widely deployed. Most people are using 2110, especially if you're working in a local area network, in a LAN, so a normal environment in a TV station. We still do see 2022-6 when having interconnects between different sites because of the audio and video synchronization not being necessary because it's a single system. So you can see on the slide over here what the difference is and where it's normally being used in order to have a distinction between the two standards. Now, there's one little confusing thing, and that's the 2022-7 standards, because a lot of people tend to believe that it's only linked to 2022-6 because it's also starting with 2022. Well, that's not the case. 2022-7 is in fact a standard which provides you redundancy. And what happens is that you will send two multicast streams, because we're talking about multicast streams over here, and the receiver will get both of those streams. But the content of that multicast stream can be a 2022-6 stream, or it can be 2110-20, the 2110-22, 2110-30, or 2110-40, being uncompressed video, being compressed video, being audio, or being ancillary data. And the most important part to know about 2022-7 is that it is the receiver that decides which stream it's going to decode. And that's done on a packet per packet basis, which means that each receiver can select itself if it's going to go for the red or the blue packet. So for most people, especially in the broadcast, we're talking about red, and red for us means on air, be careful, don't do anything. Well, in this case with 2022-7, the blue is on air at the same time. And why do we use those streams? Well, it will allow you to do upgrade of your networking equipment without impacting your broadcast, your transmissions. So that is something really important to know. And that is really, in short, the two main standards, 2022 and 2110 explained.
You. So thank you. So now SMPTE 2110 is a standard, but the control of these IP devices is covered by an NMOS specification. Steve, would you just like to inform our audience the difference between a standard and a specification? Because I know this is an area that does cause confusion and consternation with customers.
Yeah. So the differences are slight, but the standards tell you exactly what to do and how to do what to do. A specification is just a way to do something. So NMOS was developed by a completely different set of groups for control, because one of the first things that they noticed with 2110 was the lack of control. How do I take a conventional router panel and be able to say source, destination, take, and get my service? That was kind of a hole that was missing when 2110 first came out. So NMOS was created to fill that void. And it is not a standard, it is a specification of how to do something, not what to, well, it's kind of what to do. So it's really fine, the differences between it. One of the things I do want to mention is that Leader has written a very nice little app note on on what is NMOS, what is a registry server, how does it all work, how does it all tie together. So if anybody would actually like that application note, actually put a note in the chat and we can get that out to you.
So Steve, as I said, NMOS, it's a specification. And like 2110, there are different parts to it, aren't there? It's not just one all-encompassing monster specification.
That is correct. And it is still growing and still being developed. So there's first pieces of it that are out in the field and actually working quite well, which the first two that most people know about is ISO 4 and ISO 5. ISO 4 is the registry of devices that are placed on your network. So once they're placed on the network, they turn around and tell a registry server, hey, this is who I am, this is what I can do, and this is where I'm at. The ISO 5 is the connection management of how do I connect to that? How do I send this server to this receiver and deal with that? And then some of the other ones that are listed here on the page are being implemented. ISO 7 is starting to work. ISO 8 is getting out there quite widely now to be able to actually map audio on the fly and change audio around. But some of these other standards are still kind of in the, we're still developing type stages. So it goes on well beyond the list that's actually even shown here of where things are going.
Now, one question I get asked frequently about NMOS specification is the differences between MDNS and DNS SD. Kristof, are you in a position where you could enlighten our audience as to these two particular?
I hope so. It's something that we run into very often. Almost every setup that we've done with EVS, we have, in most cases, even both running at the same time. Now, to explain them, it's quite simple because MDNS stands for multicast DNS. And what happens is that your device, your NMOS device, is in the same VLAN, so in the same network, as your NMOS registration server. And in this case, on the drawing, I used Cerebrum, which is our broadcast controller. Now, what happens is that because of the multicast DNS, on the device, you don't have to do anything. The only thing you have to do is set up your NMOS registration server, and it will tell or talk on the network and yell, hey, I'm an NMOS registration server. You can find me at this address. And as soon that is happening, well, your NMOS device is going to register itself with the NMOS registration server, giving, like Steve was already saying, all the information about the inputs, the outputs, the IP addresses, the multicast addresses, the interfaces. All that information is being provided in the NMOS registration server. Now, this is MDNS, and it's limited to one VLAN, which, of course, gives us a problem when you go to larger setups and if you have security being implemented, because then you will see that you have different VLANs. So that's when they came up with DNS SD. Now, DNS SD, what happens is, at that point is that SD stands for service discovery. So what's going to happen is we're going to use the good old DNS server that we all use and that we even use today to get onto this webinar, because we typed in a web address, or we got a link, which is a web address, and that is being translated by the DNS in order to get you to the right server, because the server only responds to IP addresses. So what's happening is that with your NMOS device, you're going to give it the address of a DNS server. In the DNS server, there's two ways that there's an entry being created, or you can have your entry created automatically by your NMOS registration server, or you're going to create it manually, saying, hey, you can find a NMOS registration server at this particular IP address. Now, this information is being sent from the DNS server to your NMOS device. And from that moment on, the same thing happens like with MDNS. The device is going to register itself. However, it's going to be in different VLANs, so there will be routing enabled on your network in order to get to your NMOS registration server. Now, this is the step that we see happening a lot, especially if you're dealing with in-band management, which is something that we will talk about a little bit later. Now, there's a third possibility. Some devices do not support DNS-SD. Well, at that point, you normally have an option to manually set the address of the NMOS registration server, and that way the process will start again and the device will register itself with, in this case, Cerebrum, which runs the NMOS registration server. I hope that made it a little bit more clear.
So, Steve, you've had personal experience of both of these, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. And like most companies, we've had to grow, and most people start out with DNS or in DNS, you know, and a level plane network, and then gotten into more complicated networks where, you know, you're on another VLAN or physically on another network, and you've got to be able to jump through a router and go to that other network, that other VLAN where the server actually exists. So, yeah.
Excellent. Right. So far, we've been talking about 2110, the various data flows and that. And for those of you who are familiar with SDI video, we know that the packets come at a nice regular pace. And we don't really have to do any traffic management. Whereas in the world of IP, they do sort of arrive at different times. So we've moved from kind of a synchronous to an asynchronous data flow. If that wasn't enough of a challenge for us, we've compounded this by bringing in a new reference time, PTP. So instead of black and burst, that was a phase-based reference, we're now moving to a time-based system with PTP. And it's another essence that's within these IP systems. So Steve, you and I have done numerous presentations on PTP. Do you just want to give people a quick heads up for those who haven't had the joy of PTP darkening their door yet, of what goes on here? And if I just pull up a slide.
So
you can pick up.
Yeah. So PTP is a time-based system rather than a pulsed-based system. So we're dealing with time, and we're dealing with time from this thing called an epoch, which is January 1st, first second, first minute at January 1st, 1970, and working our way out, and how many nanoseconds off of that point are we to align everything. So it's got a lot of things that we have to deal with because we are going through an IP network. We're going through switches. There's delays going through each one of these switches. So we need to be able to account for those delays. So there's pieces within PTP that allow us to be able to send out a packet, but then note the time the packet is received, the packet is sent back, and actually take those time delays out so that we are dead even with what it was when PTP started. The other thing we really need to keep thinking about is that your PTP and your baseband sync, your bi-level, tri-level, are perfectly in time with each other. Because let's face it, in today's environment, very few, if any, facilities are 100% IP. And those two facilities need to live with each other. So you need to be really careful that PTP and your baseband reference know exactly where each other are so that we can switch between sources and things down the line where it may not be IP at the exact moment.
Kristof, I'm familiar with your products. I've been at big sporting events where there are rooms full of EVS servers and they're all connected to each other, and basically they're all networked together, aren't they? You know, to the producer choosing the shots, he doesn't care which one it comes off of. So this must be absolutely critical for you in your operation.
Yeah, it is indeed critical. And again, with the blue box that everybody knows, what happens is that we're going to synchronize all devices, of course, with the same PTP. And one of the things that is really mandatory for a video server are management messages within the PTP standard. Because most people, and we've had a lot of customers saying, well, PTP is up and running, and then we're coming in and the video server is saying, no, I'm not locking to PTP. Well, it turns out that it is looking to PTP, but it is missing the management messages. Why are those management messages important? Because we can create LTC from it. And if you record something with a server, you need LTC. Now, those management messages, what do they contain? Well, they do contain the time zone, they do contain daylight savings time, leap seconds, but also the default frame rate to be used. So like Steve was already saying, what we see with those generators, with PTP generators, it's the same device as the one that is generating the analog reference. Because the analog reference is being defined with a operational standard or 50 or 5994. This means that we need to set it also with the PTP management messages and make sure that those are set as well. Once that is done, well, the servers all are receiving the same PTP signal, can generate the same time code, LTC, to be recorded. And if then one of the producers want to take a clip from another server, well, that happens over our XNet, our proprietary network, but it allows us to synchronize and send out the clips without any delay or without any problems and with the right offsets.
So there we have exactly how we've managed to take a tool, timecode, that we've used in, well, right from day one to synchronize devices, and how we're implementing it so it works in an IP world, but it's still a tool that everybody in production is familiar with. So one of the other areas I know that is always interesting on this is the PTP domains. And once again, let me just pull up a slide here. And obviously most productions will probably run 2 domains because we're going to have a video and we'll probably also have an audio. Now, one of the things to watch out for here is that every device out of the box that has some form of PTP capability will come with domain 127. So therefore, it's good practice not to use domain 127 as your operating domain. Steve, as we've found out, we've seen switches plugged onto networks that can become the grandmaster. We've seen devices that have no real capabilities because the facility has decided to use domain 127.
Yeah, and they found out early on in a lot of the plug fests when they were running them that people would put something on to participate in the plug fest, but they happened to also be a PTP generator and not everybody was playing by the rules, and some people were actually saying they were better than what the Grandmaster was, and then turn around and take over and basically tear the entire network down. So that's one of the biggest reasons you don't want to use 127, is because every new device that's put on before you configure it turns around and starts at 127. So you just want to pick an oddball, off the world number that's going to be your site. Just like Kevin showed there, he switched it to 44. And that just happens to be the domain that both Kevin and I personally use in our office labs, just to be completely different from 127.
Other thing is to watch out is domain 0, which is basically ruled for audio. Dante.
Yes.
I believe the quote is, there's a lot of Dante in this world. So again, don't use domain 0, don't use domain 127. That way, at least you can sleep at night, is my thought on this subject.
Yes.
The other one to look at is the PTP priority architecture. So this is how one of the parameters that we can control to select what is the grandmaster. And as these networks get bigger and bigger, you need to make sure that they are kind of properly segregated. And in the example here, we've got both of the devices that could be a grandmaster on our network that are PTP generators set to priority 1. So the grandmaster is chosen by a process called the best master clock algorithm. And we're not going to go into that into detail today, but we've got videos online if you want to look at those. But one of the things we'd highlight here is that you want to make the priority 1 number sort of the group that you're working in. So as you can see on this one here, we've set the Leader LT4670 PTP Black and Burst generators to 1. And then we have a PTP distribution layer. And connected between them is a VLAN 100 that only handles PTP. And that's been set to a priority 1 to 10. So if one of our grandmasters fails, the other one will pick up. But if both of them fail, then we drop down to this layer here, where one of these, with its boundary clock capabilities, will pick up. That's really as far as you want the best master clock algorithm to go in its selection process. So you then really want to set these ports on the spines further down, not to have the capability to take part in the best master clock algorithm. But as you can see here, we've set priority 1 to 20. And then when we finally get down to the leaves at the bottom, they're set to 100. So what you don't want is some spurious device connected down here on the leaves that could influence what's going on up here. Now, this is all well and good. But if you're an OB truck and you're connected to a broadcast facility and you're connected to their PTP reference, if you're set to priority 1, there is the potential that you could take over and become the grandmaster for that facility. So a general good practice here is to make sure that priority 1 here is set to a lower value than 1. In this example, we set them to 10. The priority 2, which appears everywhere, is then the order that the failover takes place within that priority 1 group. It's really worth, when you're designing your PTP network, sitting down, thinking about this, planning out kind of the failure and cascade process, because we have seen instances where the best master log algorithm selects a device that is not connected to GPS reference because of the way the priority architecture has been set up. So if you do this right, this system will scale for you and give you excellent resilience and reliability. And these are just little things that you should look out for. Any comments, gentlemen, on that one?
I would like to add one more thing, and there is a reason to use the same priority 1 for both grandmasters and have a distinction on the level of the priority 2. And we've had customers where they said, well, we took the first grandmaster being priority 10, like in this case, but the second grandmaster priority 1 already 11. Now, the problem that you have at that point is that in case you would lose your GPS antenna on the first one, well, because of the fact that priority 1 is 10 and on the second one, priority 1 is 11, it will stay on the first one. While as it is configured over here, what happens is that it loses the GPS antenna, and there are some other parameters that they're going to compare. One of them is the accuracy. And because the first one loses or lost its GPS antenna, the accuracy will be a lot less compared to the second one. And at that point, the second one will take over.
Yes. I've seen many networks that they set up and they test their failover by just yanking the fiber out of the switch. And yes, that definitely causes a switch because you've completely lost your PTP. But yeah, Kristof, I'm 100% with you, because I'd turn around and walk in on those, yank GPS off the back, and nothing happened. And they're just going, what in the heck happened? That's the whole reason for this configuration, is because the clock class sits between priority 1 and priority 2, and the clock class is whether you're locked to GPS and what quality is your clock. And the second unit's going to be better because it is GPS locked, just like you said, Kristof.
Just one more thing is that it may sound strange to a lot of people to put priorities on switches. Well, my experience is that with a customer, they didn't put any priority on the switches. And what happened was that they only had to start with only one grandmaster, but the grandmaster failed. Now, looking at the best master clock algorithm, because all the switches are almost exactly the same except for one parameter, which is based on the MAC address, well, they were starting to discuss who was going to be the winner, but there are a lot of MAC addresses on a single switch. And because of the principle, how often it needs to turn, what happened was that it wouldn't even select one grandmaster, even in such a case that when the real grandmaster was rebooted, he couldn't get into the algorithm. So the only way what they had to do was reboot the switches in order to make sure that the grandmaster got back again. So that's one of the reasons to set also a priority on your switches.
Yes.
Even if you're never going to use it, hopefully never going to use it.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just touched on the subject of wide area networks, and this is something that Steve and I frequently seem to get embroiled in. That if we go back to the days of SDI video, we'd obviously have a broadcast center and we'd have an OB truck, and they both would have a device that would be connected to GPS, and life would be good. We'd run through the production, they'd stay synchronized, and everybody would pat themselves on the back at the end of the day. But we have seen in the world of IP, people locking remote devices over a wide area network using PTP. Now, the Leader products do support PTP over the LAN. And Steve, we've got many customers using this configuration on like a local area network, you know, within a studio campus. You know, this is a great way to do it, where you've got complete control over the network. But when you move into the world of a wide area network, you've got no control over what's going on between you and the venue. And one of the things we've had to talk to a lot of people is you have to almost go back to the way we work with SDI video and Black and Burst, and having two devices connected to GPS that are capable of generating both PTP and obviously your Black and Burst and tri-level sync references. And it works. Steve, is that a fair assumption of the problem and how to get around it?
Most definitely. Most definitely. The nice thing about it is GPS will be exactly at the same point at both points within the network. And you won't have your PTP wobbling back and forth. And Kristof, you can, I'm sure, talk to this in much more detail than even I can, having dealt with live broadcasts.
Well, indeed, what we've experienced is that this is indeed the best solution to work. For shorter distances, yes, indeed, you can use the link, especially if it's a dedicated link, a rented fiber or a black fiber. You could synchronize using the PTP from the broadcast center, but in most cases, that's not going to happen. So a GPS antenna on the receivers is making, well, sorry, GPS antenna on both sides will make sure that they all are running on the same PTP clock. And that will definitely solve the problem of not being synchronized.
Excellent. So we've touched on PTP. As I said, we have a number of videos, we have a number of papers that talk about PTP if you want more detail on that. We've talked about standards, specifications. With any new technology comes terminology, new terminology. And the broadcast industry is very great at assuming that everybody understands this terminology and throws it around. Oh, you know about in-band, out-band, PTP and that. And we may be a little bit scared to admit, actually, we don't completely understand this. So, Kristof, would you be available now to sort of take us through some of the common terminologies that we frequently hear? And
absolutely.
So let's just get the. So there we go.
So
as I mentioned,
yeah,
this one, and you alluded to it earlier, comes up frequently.
This one does come up very frequently, and it's very often a misunderstanding. What does it mean, in-band and out-of-band management? Now, as we learned, we have NMOS. NMOS allows it, NMOS ISO5 allows us to control a receiver, but also a sender. But how do we get to that device? Well, if we're doing out-of-band management, and I took the example over here with Cerebrum again, we've got our Cerebrum server, our primary server, which is connected to an edge switch or a media control switch. And that switch has a VLAN connected or has a VLAN configured, and your receiver has a management interface, and that is a 1 gig connection going into the edge switch. So what happens is that we're going out of band, meaning we've got a dedicated connection to control our receiver. Now, stepping towards in-band management, what's the difference with that one is that we're going to use, in fact, the 100 gig or 25 gig or maybe 200 or 400 gig in the future interface of the device, and we're going to control it through that port, meaning the same port as where our multicast streams are being received or being sent out. That is what we call in-band management. Now, compared to out-of-band management can be done in a single VLAN, which means that if we do out-of-band management, again, going back to the NMOS MDNS and DNSD, Well, with out-of-band management, you can easily do MDNS. With in-band management, because we're on a different interface, we're on a different networks, well, we definitely need to use DNS-SD or static configuration in order to make sure that our NMOS or that our device is using the right interfaces to register with the NMOS registration server. So again, in-band management uses the same interface as the multicast streams. Out-of-band management uses a dedicated 1 gig interface in order to be controlled.
Thank you. Next one that now through gets mentioned is SDN, software-defined networks.
Well, software-defined networking, it's a software that controls your network. Now, it sounds frightening because in the past, what happened was that we've got a user and the user was connecting to all switches individually. Right now, our user is talking to the SDN, and it's the SDN that controls the switches. Now, that user can be another software because we're not expecting the operators to go onto the SDN and start typing strange commands. No, what will happen is that the operators will use control panels that are linked to the broadcast controller, and it's the broadcast controller that talks to the SDN. Now, there are a number of solutions available. Some of them are using static multicast routing, like Cerebrum SDN, which is EVS, but also Arista MCS. Now, over here, you can see a network. So we've got Cerebrum. Northbound, we have control panels and user interfaces. Cerebrum runs an NMOS registration server and will then talk to media senders, media receivers, but it can also talk to a third-party NMOS registration server. At the bottom, we've got the media transport network, media flow network, where all the multicasts are happening. And then on the right side, we see that there is the SDN control and switch monitoring, where again, it's in fact the Cerebrum talking to the SDN, and that way the SDN will control how the multicasts will go over the network. Now, if we can just go back to the previous slide quickly, I was just saying that there's different ways of using an SDN, and that is with static multicast routing, but there is also still the possibility to use IGMP and PIM. Cisco, for example, with the Nexus Dashboard Fabric Controller and with NBM, non-blocking multicasting, is capable of making, in fact, IGMP and PIM bandwidth aware. Compared to static multicast routing, well, it's the SDN that knows exactly how many streams are already on a certain uplink, and it's going to orchestrate all those streams directly. SDNs also do admission control policies, so setting limits to the bandwidth in order to avoid oversubscription. And they also are capable, or at least some of them, to set access lists in order to avoid malicious streams entering the network or somebody sniffing on the network and trying to capture a multicast stream.
Excellent. So we talked about standards and specifications. We talked about control, we talked about timing, we talked about the jargon. The next thing is to get experience on this, isn't it, Kristof, really? This is the only way you're going to learn. It's
indeed. And for me, if I can give all the people here today an advice, is that build your own experience as soon as possible. Waiting will make sure that you are late. Everybody is looking at it. Everybody is testing it. I'm not going to say that you have to change the whole broadcast facility and change everything in one go to IP, but I would suggest that you definitely start with smaller setups so that you at least learn the new technology. Now, we as EVS, but of course also Leader PHABRIX, we do have the experience. Like Kevin was saying, we do this almost on a daily basis. And it's not something that we do once. No, we are already doing this for several years. We're joining the JTNM testing events. We're doing projects. We're doing proof of concepts. And the JTNM makes sure that the interoperability is tested. And that gives you the advantage of being sure that you're not in an environment which is limited to only one or two manufacturers, but that you're open to select whatever you want to use.
I think the great thing, if you haven't done this, go to the JTNM website. You can download the results of the tests. You can see each manufacturer's product and the tests and the results for them. So if you've got a particular favorite product, manufacturer and that, and you're thinking going through this IP migration, go there, have a look. Obviously, that will give you the reassurance that they've been through this process. That, you know, you're not on your own. This has been integrated to all the other products that you use in your broadcast chain. And just to emphasize, as Leader and PHABRIX, Steve, we normally end up being the referee, don't we, in these builds?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
You know, what's being sent, what's being received. You know, we sit there in the middle and try and find out what's going on, whether it's the timing, it's the control. Is it the -20, -40, 30? Does the -40 actually contain information about the right streams for the closed captions, your audio descriptions, all of that stuff, Steve, isn't it? It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, that's where time code lives. And as Kristof was talking about, when you're dealing with servers, you're sunk without it. We've also got some people wanting to know, especially in live events, what about -20, 2110 2022 dealing with JPEG XS? What's been your experiences with that, Kristof, in live events?
Well, the thing is that JPEG XS is something that we see being used to limit the bandwidth on interconnections. For example, with some of the big events, you most of the time have an IBC and the different venues. Well, between the venues and the IBCs, we will use JPEG XS, and with Neuron Compress, one of EVS's products, you can do those compressions and decompressions. The compression rate can be set according to your needs, and we can go from lossy compression, because there's always, you lose always detail, but it's not visible depending on, of course, on how far you go with the compression. This has been used in big sporting events on distances 30, 40 kilometers, but also on distances over 1,000 kilometers. And we have been doing testing in Japan with some of the broadcasters over there, making sure that the Neuron Compress is behaving as expected, being able to decode even compressed streams coming from other manufacturers, which are using also the JPEG XS standard.
Yeah.
So Steve, we've got that capability on the Leaders N series also, haven't we, to analyze those JPEG XS streams and also generate them as well.
Yeah, so it is really nice that when you're setting your networks up, sometimes you're building your pipe at the same time you're configuring the truck on a remote. You have the ability to go ahead and heat up the pipe and make sure everything is done correctly while you're still doing the back end. Be able to do things. I know from our setups that we've had at NAB, the amount of delay, I've been very impressed with JPEG XS at how small the delays are and being able to view the SDI, the 2110, and the JPEG XS side by side and verify the quality, verify the accuracy, and be able to see those is mind-boggling, really, especially when you're used to dealing with other conversion systems that would have several hundred milliseconds of delay.
Excellent. So, to wrap up, because I realise we've now been talking for nearly 50 minutes, so to just quickly summarise, Kristof, don't be afraid.
Yeah, indeed. And
We're
I
here
have
to
to
help
I have to remind people on how easy it was to go from analog to digital when we stepped into SDI. It wasn't easy to go from SD to HD. And it always, and that's, I think, everybody's experience, it always takes time to finish the transition, and it always takes time to learn a new technology and gain the experience. I'm very well aware that going from analog to digital video is not the same thing as going from SDI to IP. It's a completely new technology. But you have to look at it in a certain way. And I remember when I started with a systems integrator, before that I worked in a TV station, and that was already working everything in SDI. And when I worked with a systems integrator, the first thing that they had me do was aligning an analog video switcher. Oh my God, I was going like, why didn't we go to SDI everywhere? Because it's so much easier. Well, I'm pretty sure within a number of years, and I'm not going to say months, but it will take a number of years, we will look back at SDI because IP will give us more flexibility, more functionality compared to what we can do with SDI right now. But it takes some time. My advice, and I think it's the same advice from Leader and from PHABRIX, is that go with a standards-based solution. NMOS is being implemented by most manufacturers. 2110 is widely deployed. There is interoperability. The implementation is easier because of the NMOS, and there's no vendor locking, which doesn't mean that it's really easy to do it. But again, it's getting a lot better compared to where we were 5 years ago.
So, Cindy,
Definitely.
we've been talking. Have we been getting any questions coming from our audience?
So many questions. One that popped up, so many questions. And if we don't get to your questions on the session here, we'll circle back to you. So no worries about that. So one of the questions, and you touched on this a little bit already, but could you speak to the advantages and complications with JPEG XS as it relates to 2110 around latency, compatibility, and monitoring? And before I throw to you, I want to say we're having a session also on JPEG XS coming up in a few months, so stay tuned. But over to you for the question.
Go ahead, Kristof.
Well, the JPEG XS with Neuron, the delay is really, really low, which allows us to use it without a problem. And as I've said, we've been using it for big sporting events where we had them between the venues and the IBC, where we were running studios, where these images came in, and there was not a problem at all. Nobody even noticed this, that the video was compressed or had been compressed. Second thing was that it was afterwards being sent over a few thousand kilometers. And again, that compression didn't cause any issues at all. It worked just perfectly fine. Again, the advantage of having a lower bandwidth, which means that if you have to rent fiber optics, you can do it with a 10 gig fiber instead of having to go for 100 gig. And that will give you really some financial advantage as well.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is we are in the early stages of JPEG XS it's like the early days of MPEG. If anybody was around, especially MPEG 2 when it first started, yes, it's supposed to be an interoperability standard, and you're supposed to be able to take anybody's encoder, connect it to anybody's decoder, but test it. Make sure that it does, because I have seen more than once, even on JPEG XS now, that there's something quirky in their encoder, and they've put the inverse of that quirk in their decoder, and they work perfect with each other. But it's something that went outside of what it was supposed to do, and it doesn't work with other devices. And it's really fun convincing that vendor that no, you messed up here.
It's the most difficult part often, because one vendor to the same vendor, well, it works, and the other vendor says exactly the same, except when they go from one to the other, it doesn't work. And then, of course, you have something like Leader, which will help you decide which one is the right one to go for. And then again, you can test with other manufacturers and see who's responding in the same way. And that way the interoperability is tested, is validated. I would love to see that they start doing the more testing on JPEG XS also with the JT&M events. But that's something where we will have to wait for the results. But it's definitely something, like Steve was saying, that I advise test it, like one of our customers did do, and they did select TVS to go forward for the compression with the neuron compress.
Yeah. So
Steve, I think,
and as Kristof did say, start a greenfield, what I call a greenfield, a little block within your facility, build up a mock configuration where you can test products against each other. Two things will benefit out of that. One is you'll gain the knowledge of how it works, how it interconnects, the configurations. The other is you'll be able to test vendor X against vendor Y. And yes, we are early in this, and you will find minor quirks that someone doesn't do something that the standard says, yes, thou shall, it isn't thou should, and they didn't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just saying, one of the things we found is that within a live environment, an SDI signal may be turned into 2110-20 and then into -22.
Yes.
And if 22 doesn't work, you need a device that allows you to, well, is -20 okay, or is actually the SDI that's the ultimate source of this good? And again, with the Leader product here, it's an analyzer, it's a generator. So you can connect that to a switch, you can start testing, generating your own signals, and then gradually start to build on it. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a huge expense to start with, and you can learn an awful lot really quickly.
Cindy, next.
Yeah. So great question about security. To what extent has data security already been implemented in NMOS, IS-10, or 2110? And is it supported on a large scale? Is it supported in any products? Security is more and more of a consideration.
I can take that one. The IS-10 or BCP003, which is part of the IS-10, is not widely implemented. Not at all. What I would advise is take a look at the technology pyramid from the EBU, because they're showing where they are with the different layers, meaning NMOS, meaning 2110 doing, and DHCP doing security. And that will show you that security, everybody is working really hard on it. Now, security within a live broadcast environment with IP is a different topic. And the experience that I have is that try to keep it separated as much as possible. We've done projects where the customer wanted to have one very big single network. In the end, it turned out that they separated things, meaning that They had dedicated computers for the broadcast controller and the live broadcast environment. Yeah, indeed, the technology pyramid, there it is.
There you go. Sorry it took so long to get it up.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. But also, they separated everything up until the point where they had like journalists coming in with their laptop, and journalists wanted to do edit their stuff, their things that they recorded. But they said at that point, like, instead of being on the Wi-Fi, if you're with your laptop on the Wi-Fi, well, you've got internet access. If you want to edit, you have to plug in a cable into your laptop. And from the moment that the cable is plugged in, well, internet is closed off. In order to make sure that there was no connection between the internet over the laptop onto the broadcast environment. So currently, that's the layer of security that they implement, separation. Of course, that's not enough, because you do not always have the possibility to do that. And therefore, everybody's aware in the broadcast industry that security is becoming very, very important. I have a colleague, because I'm a global solutions architect, live IP, I've got a colleague who's doing nothing but cybersecurity. He's the one who's looking at EVS products, looking at what's the status, are there ports open, because it goes a lot further than just saying, well, we have to secure this. No, it's a lot more than that. So there's definitely a lot more to come. We still have to move forward, but everybody is fully aware, and it's really important. I'm pretty sure for Leader and PHABRIX, but also for EVS, we're working really hard on this.
Cindy?
When the grandmasters are set to the suggested priorities, what's the expected behavior when there's no visibility of the GPS satellite or the GPS is jammed?
Well, that's the same as losing GPS. You'll lose your GPS lock, and you'll go to holdover, and you'll go to the internal oscillator. If the second unit, your B unit, if you will, Grandmaster, is not locked, it then will still be clock class 6 and locked to GPS, and it'll walk over. But if both, because of jamming, they both drop, it's going to stay exactly where it is, because the same conditions has happened to both Grandmasters, and nothing changes other than you've rolled to the internal oscillator, and the internal oscillator will keep you accurate for days and not have a problem. And anybody's current SPG, sync pulse generator, when it regains GPS, will just slowly phase itself back into perfect synchronization with GPS. Won't do a 360 whirl to go find it, and everybody is absolutely fine.
That makes sense. It eases back in. So with NMOS being adopted as the primary control or subscription management protocol, are there available solutions for small builds for doing that management?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of different things. I mean, how small do you want to get? I run a small NMOS registry server on a Raspberry Pi. I mean,
okay, can't get smaller than Raspberry Pi, can you?
You can run it on a Docker. You can run it on something that small if your requirements are not huge. Or you can go, with our friends here from EVS, to a very large system that can control thousands of nodes. So it just depends where you need to go. I mean, there's solutions out there that, like for my office here, I've only got, 10, 15 transmitters, receivers in my little lab in my office. I don't need huge. So running it on a Raspberry Pi, it works instantly, it works perfect. But that wouldn't suit for, a complete broadcast facility. So yes, there's things that you can do.
Love that. All right. So for smaller folks, Docker, Raspberry Pi, and then
Mhm.
EVS, et cetera, for the bigger ones. Makes so much sense. How can other IP-based protocols, NDI, SRT, be used in an ST2110 environment? Are there native 2110 NDI converter hardware available, or do they have to go through SDI, as in like NDI to SDI to 2110? Did that make sense?
Yes.
It does make sense.
I'm not that familiar with third-party products within that, but I believe there are some products that will take 2110 in and do other compression schemes off of them other than JPEG XS. But you're going to inherit the larger delays of those other compression systems. Kristof?
Yeah, I think we've seen and we've had discussions with customers where they wanted to have indeed NDI also on the same network. Now, if it's the same, if it's a compressed multicast stream, it's something that can be on the same network without a problem. But it's indeed creating different delays. And what we see is customers keeping what they call the live IP environment separate from the NDI, because NDI, I'm not going to say that it's not broadcast quality, but it's mainly used to go between a server and a screen if there's more distances over it, and to get that video over there for editing purposes. I haven't seen any NDI being used in real live broadcast environments. Over there, we're still using the uncompressed or JPEG XS compression, where quality remains like the same high quality.
Yes. Yeah, JPEG typically is visually lossless.
Yeah.
If you don't push it beyond the bounds you should. I mean, you can get down into hundreds of megabits and it's absolutely pristine.
Thank you all for being here. We do have more questions, and I think we'll circle back with everyone else afterward, if that's okay, knowing the time we're hit. Is that okay with you,
Yes.
fellow panelists?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
All right. Thank you.
We will make sure that everybody's questions are answered, and we will send you emails with the answers.
And as we said, don't be frightened to reach out to us. Our contact details are on the screen. There is no such thing as a stupid question when it comes to this. There's a stupid answer, but there is no such thing as a stupid question. So we're here to help.
Yes,
We've got,
I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank Kristof for joining us and helping us out with this. It's been great working with you, sir. And Cindy, as always, thank you.
Thank you all for the
you.
invitation, and I'm really happy that I was able to help you guys, and hopefully the people watching have learned things, and let's see where we get this year with all the sporting events. It will be a lot of fun, that's for sure.
Definitely. Definitely.
Kristof, thank you once again for your time and sharing the wealth of knowledge that you've gleaned and gained over the many years of doing this IP stuff. Thank you once again.
With pleasure.
Take care, everybody.
Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.